This video is supported by CuriosityStream. Hey, how you doing? You doing okay? You hanging in there? I want to just kind of talk to you guys. I know this year has been the dumpster fire that just keeps on giving, and yeah, it spawned a lot of dank memes, and that's nice, but behind all that laughter, there's some people who are really actually struggling right now, and tensions are high, and it can kind of take its toll on you after a while. I know I'm feeling it. My anxiety level is at least twice what it normally is, and I'm actually in a pretty good spot right now. I'm in a lot better place than a lot of people out there, and I just kind of keep thinking, my God, if I'm feeling this much anxiety around everything, I just can't even imagine what some other people who are really struggling and really feeling lost right now are going through. So this video was originally supposed to be a two-parter. I did a video in March that was called Great Ideas That Went Horribly Wrong. It was kind of like good things that went bad. Well, this was supposed to be the reverse of that. It was supposed to be bad things that turned out good, like tragedies that led to positive outcomes. And then we just seemed to be beset by one tragedy after another, and it just never really felt like it was the right time to do this, and I almost scrapped it all together. But then, I don't know. I've been trying to think of 2020 in a different way lately. It's mostly for my own mental health. I've been trying to think of 2020 less as, you know, the dumpster fire that we're all experiencing right now, and more as a year of transition, you know, a year of change. Change is natural and it occurs over geologic time. It evolves slowly, incrementally over long periods, but then those long periods of incremental change are sometimes punctuated by periods of drastic, rapid, even violent change. And I think through the lens of history, we focus less on the temporary struggle and loss that everybody goes through and more on the change itself. I've been thinking a lot about how people are going to look at 2020 in the future, you know, what that's going to look like. And I think they'll focus a lot less on protests and political division and masks and quarantine and all that, and instead look at the change that all of that brought in, whether it goes one direction or another. Which direction that goes in, I don't know. That's up to us. But I think this change of thinking has helped me out quite a bit, you know? 2020 is a year of transition and change. It just worked out that way. But we get to be the agents of that change. We get to affect how the world is going to be as we move forward. And in that sense, we're kind of lucky to be alive right now. We're kind of lucky to be going through this. Now, none of this is meant to take away from the actual feelings of loss and struggle that we're all dealing with on an individual level, some of us more than others. It's tough. It's scary. There's a lot of converging issues coming together at the same time right now, the proverbial perfect storm, if you will. Most of us have never seen anything like this in our lifetimes, maybe ever. I just found that this way of looking at it has helped me to kind of not freak out too much, you know, to kind of flatten the curve of my anxiety level, so to speak. And I don't know anybody who doesn't need at least a little bit of that. So let's take a look at how challenging periods in history have led to positive outcomes and see what we can learn from it so that maybe we can take this situation that we're living in and create a better world. Some of the most distressing video that we've seen over the last few weeks has been images of people rioting and looting storefronts and taking advantage of the situation these protests have brought up. Now, this has been framed in a lot of ways. Many have used this to undermine the entire meaning behind the protests. Others claim that these are outside instigators whose whole purpose for being there was to undermine the meaning of these protests. And others might be keen to point out that this footage right here is from when Philadelphia won the Super Bowl. So looting happens. However, at the risk of sounding like I'm defending lawlessness, there was at least one time when rioting and looting led to a cultural revolution. It was the middle of summer in New York City in 1977. The economy was in decline, the crime rate was rising, people were struggling, the Son of Sam stalked the streets, and on top of all of that, they were in the middle of a historic heat wave. And then a little after 9:30 p.m. on July 13th, the lights went out. It was partly caused by a lightning storm in Westchester County and partly caused by good old-fashioned human error, but either way, all of a sudden, all at once, the city was plunged into darkness. And that's when the looting started. It took a full 25 hours for all the power to be restored, and in that time, 1,600 stores had been ransacked and over 1,000 fires had been set. Sounds like the opening scene to The Crow. Now, New York City had been through some power outages before. There was a pretty big one in 1965, for example, but for some reason, this one just exploded into all kinds of chaos. The city was just a powder keg of economic instability, especially in the black communities. But according to some music historians, one of the things that came out of this explosion was the hip-hop scene. Now, hip-hop music had been around for a few years before the blackout, but it was a totally different beast than what we see today. It was focused a lot more on DJs than rappers. Pioneers like DJ Kool Herc, Grand Wizard Theodore, and Africa Bambaataa made names for themselves playing block parties and clubs, mostly in the Bronx, where they essentially turned mixers and turntables into instruments. By mixing samples of funk and R&B and innovating techniques like scratching, they were forging an entirely new sound and underground scene that was poised for a breakout. The problem is all that DJ equipment was expensive. You know, if you had a guitar, you could go play on some street corner and people could hear you no problem, but if you wanted to be a DJ, it took thousands of dollars worth of equipment plus a power source to make it all work. And if there was one thing people were short of at the time, it was $1,000 bills. But according to legend, many of those 1,600 stores that got robbed were music stores and electronics stores, and suddenly the streets were awash with cheap turntables and mixers. And from all this chaos, hip-hop became democratized and flourished in the late 70s and the early 80s. More DJs meant more opportunities to team up with hype men and rappers, and in 1979, Rapper's Delight by Sugar Hill Gang came out and broke hip-hop into the mainstream, and New York became the new epicenter of this movement. And one of the artists on the front lines of this movement was DJ Grandmaster Caz, who admitted in an interview with the 99% Invisible podcast that he was actually one of those looters on that night in 1977.
I went right to the place where I bought my first set of DJ equipment. I spent money in here. And I went and I got me a mixer out of there. After the blackout, all this new wealth that I like to call it, you know what I mean, was founded by people, and they just, you know, opportunities sprang from that. And you can see the differences before the blackout and after.
Now, obviously, this was a genre of music that was already growing and coalescing before the 1977 blackout, but there's reason to believe that this blackout and the events that occurred during that blackout helped to kind of move it into the mainstream. So it's interesting to think that one of the most popular genres of music in the world might have been born out of a lightning strike. Speaking of weather phenomena, in 1977, one weather phenomena caused a tragedy that changed the airline industry forever. It was March 27th, about 4 months before the New York blackouts, and the island of Tenerife in the Canary Islands was overrun with redirected flights. The reason is because the main airport on those islands, on the island of Las Palmas, was shut down earlier that day because it had been bombed by Canary Island separatists. Las Palmas Airport was kind of the way station for people who landed and then connected with cruise lines, so all those flights got redirected to the Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife. And as if that wasn't bad enough, on that particular day, the entire island was covered in fog. One was a Pan Am flight from Los Angeles, the other one was a KLM flight from Amsterdam, and because of a communication error, they both thought that they had clearance to go. And they were on opposite sides of the runway, and they both took off at the exact same time towards each other. Because of the fog, they only became aware of each other within about 2,000 feet of colliding. One of them veered downwards, the other one went up, but it was too late. They collided in midair and killed 583 people. To this day, it is the biggest airline disaster in history. Obviously, months of investigations followed this to try to figure out how this could possibly happen because of just a simple communication error. Clearly, some standardized methods of communication needed to be adopted around the world. So they codified the communications between the tower and the plane, and colloquialisms like okay, for example, were done away with. They decided that the words take off were only to be used when a plane definitely had clearance to go. I guess in this case, somebody just sort of casually said take off, and then the plane thought that meant they had clearance, and that's what happened. But they also placed greater importance on team decision-making instead of a hierarchical top-down approach. You know, in the early days of airlines, it was more structured like the military. You know, you had the pilot, and you didn't question the pilot, you did what he said, but they decided that this was not the best way to go because in this case, there were people that could have stopped what was happening from happening, but they didn't speak up because that wasn't something that you did at the time. These and many other changes help increase the safety of flying, and it's been a part of a process that has made flying actually the safest form of travel in the entire world, not counting any viruses you might catch along the way. Now, of course, tragedies like plane crashes are always going to lead to new safety standards to try to keep that from happening again in the future and, you know, make it safer along the way, but that might not have any relevance to what's going on right now, you may be thinking. Okay, then, let's talk about the Black Death. The Black Death swept through Europe from 1346 to 1351, and it killed between 75 and 200 million people, meaning on the low end it averaged around 30,000 people a day for 6 years. Of course, that's an average. It was much lower during some periods and much higher during its peak. And for perspective, the worst day reported so far on COVID worldwide was 8,000 deaths. It was an epidemic of the bubonic plague carried by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is carried in fleas and the rats that those fleas feed upon. And then once it got into humans, it just became all about being in contact with bodily fluids. Now, the disease had been around for over 2,000 years or so, but it was in the 1300s when a global worldwide trade network had been established that it made its way into Europe and just wreaked havoc and killed with reckless abandon. The Black Death was efficient, so much so that Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio wrote that victims, quote, ate lunch with their friends and dinner with their ancestors in paradise. City homes were left empty because people either died or they went out into the country to try to escape the chaos, and farm fields were left abandoned because there weren't any workers living to take care of them. This, of course, led to food shortages, which only exacerbated the problem. People abandoned their loved ones to save themselves and purge their communities of undesirables that they blamed the disease on and massacred them. And worst of all, they probably refused to wear masks. By 1351, the plague had finally slowed down, and some of the things that helped were actually some of the stuff we're doing today: social distancing and quarantining. In fact, the word quarantine comes from a rule that was around at the time that sailors, when they arrived at a port, had to stay on their boats for 40 days, or a quarantino, to prove that they weren't sick. By the time it was over, 30 to 50% of Europe's population was dead. It was literally a bacterial version of the snapping, and it would take more than 200 years for Europe's population to recover. Yersinia pestis would pop up here and there. After this, it showed up in London in 1600 in the Plague of London. It still shows up today every once in a while, but luckily we now have antibiotics that can fight it. It's hard to imagine a silver lining amidst all that death and chaos. Doctors' outfits were really dope, but it did actually spur some changes that made people's lives better and changed the social structure of Europe forever. Remember when I said that farm fields were left abandoned because there weren't enough living laborers to take care of it because of all the, dying? Well, basic supply and demand says that the less you have of something, the more valuable it becomes. And what this means is an end to the feudal system, which had been in place for thousands of years, where the poorer lower classes were basically existing in indentured servitude to the wealthier landowners. But that land only had value if there were people there to work it. So the people that were left over to work that land could set their own prices. The power structure flipped for the first time, and that improved the lives of not only laborers, but also artisans and craftsmen as well. And if the lords tried to lower wages, the people would organize in revolts, sort of early versions of labor unions. The collapse of feudalism led to people moving into the cities where they could engage in trades and crafts, and for the first time in history, a middle class was born. The population also became healthier after the Black Death. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. One is just that, with fewer people, there's more resources to go around, so people's diets got better, they got healthier that way. And the other way is that the people who survived had genes that made them less prone to infection. But yeah, anthropologist Sharon DeWitt did a study of skeletons before and after the plague and found that the number of people who survived past the age of 70 doubled. Now, another totally random thing that came out of the plague was that people believed at the time that diseases were spread by miasma, or bad-smelling air, foul air. So people would carry around aromatic flowers to make things smell a little better around them. They felt that that would keep the disease away. And that's actually what was in the beak of those doctor's masks. It was like a personal potpourri bowl. But yeah, it suddenly became important for people to smell good, so an entire industry came up around personal fumigants, or perfume, as we call it today. So you can tie a direct line from the Black Plague to 80s obsession commercials.
She was a fever from which I will never recover. All heat and hunger. She inflamed my senses.
Save me.
And when she had devoured my very soul, please, when I had nothing left to surrender, she abandoned me to the wreckage of myself and smiled.
In the kingdom of passion, the ruler is obsession. Calvin Klein's obsession.
Oh, the smell of it.
At famous bar.
Oh, 80s commercials. You're the best. And the last and most controversial upside to the Black Plague is that it may have sort of set the stage for the Renaissance. And this is controversial because there were actually a lot of factors that led to the birth of the Renaissance, but one of the impacts of the Black Death was that it caused people to kind of break the stranglehold of the Catholic Church. I guess there's something about praying all day, every day, and still watching half the people around you die that makes you, question things. People's spiritual views changed after the Black Death. They started to focus more on human-focused accomplishments, or humanism, as it became known. This led to a slow and steady trend toward the natural scientists, which led to shifts of thinking that eventually led to the Renaissance. So some could make the argument, and many have, that without the Black Death, you wouldn't have had Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo, Raphael, the other Ninja Turtles, Sir Isaac Newton, Galileo, Copernicus. And without the Black Death, that system of feudalism would have had no reason to change and could have continued on for another several hundred years. Social and economic systems, they have a bit of an inertia to them. They continue to go on their course until some force is applied that changes their direction. That's just physics. And that applied force, unfortunately, usually comes in the form of some kind of horrible disaster like the Black Plague. That happened more recently, in the form of the Great Depression. On October 24, 1929, U.S. stock investors lost confidence in the market and traded 12.9 million shares. It became known as Black Thursday. Black Tuesday happened 5 days later when another 16 million shares were traded. These stock market crashes are what helped propel the United States and the world into the Great Depression, the most extensive economic downturn in the last 100 years. We've seen recessions in our time, and many economists are saying that we're going into a pretty big one right now, but none of them come close to the Great Depression. Lasting from 1929 to 1939 in the US, this time period experienced deflation, or steep declines in prices and industrial production, massive unemployment, huge increases in poverty and homelessness, industrial production fell by almost 47%, the gross domestic product declined by 30%, and the unemployment rate was more than 20%. Now, of course, it wasn't just a couple of stock market crashes that led to a 10-year depression. It was the result of systemic problems that were just unsustainable. And add on top of that the ecological, disaster of the Dust Bowl, and the Great Depression was truly a perfect storm. This led to mass migrations of people flooding into the cities looking for work, and even led to the rise of extremist movements like the Nazi regime in Germany. Some of the measures that helped to end the Great Depression included the abandonment of the gold standard and the practice of currency devaluation. This helped some countries increase money supplies, which led to spending, lending, and investment. Increased U.S. government spending on jobs and social welfare programs, such as the New Deal. This helped stimulate production by increasing demand. And increased military spending in the U.S. Ultimately, it would take World War II to bring us out of it. Now, even though it was a difficult time, to say the least, there were some innovations and inventions that came out of it that have changed the world. In the mid-1930s, a guy named Leo Fender lost his job at a tire company. So he started repairing radios for people because that was always kind of a side hobby of his. And eventually he got good enough at it and had enough clients, he was able to build his own radio repair shop. And some of his regular customers were musicians that would bring in amplifiers for him to repair. Eventually he started building amplifiers specifically for musicians. And eventually he would meet a musician named Clayton Orr Doc Kaufman in 1941, and together the two of them invented the Fender guitar. And the rest, as they say, is history. Also, one of the government programs that was made to stimulate the economy and create jobs was the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. It was established on April 5, 1933 as part of FDR's New Deal program, and by July of that year, more than 300,000 men were working for the CCC doing things like fighting forest fires, planting trees, clearing and maintaining access roads, reseeding lands, controlling soil erosion, and building wildlife refuges. By the time the program ended at the start of World War II, over 3.5 billion trees had been planted and over 700 state parks had been created. There's also the Works Projects Administration, or the WPA, which similarly employed millions of unemployed people, mostly men, to do things like building roads. They built over 1 million kilometers of roads and over 10,000 bridges. They also built buildings and public works projects, typifying the Art Deco style of the day. Fair Park here in Dallas is a great example of that. They also hired artists and sculptors to paint murals and statues, many of which are still around today. And some of them are coming down today. It also supported historical and archaeological efforts that expanded our knowledge of pre-Columbian civilizations in the Americas. And there were a plethora of governmental agencies and policies that are still providing stability to our country today, including Fair Labor Standards Act, the Federal Aviation Administration, the Federal Communications Commission, the National Labor Relations Board, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. And of course, arguably the most significant program that came out of the Depression was Social Security, which started in 1935. Yeah, the US was the only industrialized country that didn't have some kind of unemployment insurance or Social Security when the Depression started. Roosevelt, as New York governor in 1929, said, "No greater tragedy exists in modern civilization than the aged, worn-out worker who, after a life of ceaseless effort and useful productivity, must look forward for his declining years to a poorhouse. A modern social consciousness demands a more humane and efficient arrangement." And while Social Security has many of its detractors and criticisms over the years, it has undoubtedly kept millions of people from falling into poverty in their golden years. Political differences aside, though, the Great Depression spawned many ideas and programs that continue to make our lives better to this very day. So, yeah. Right now it may feel like the world is a giant flaming turd. Because it is. This is a year of transition, and transition is hard, but when you look at it with a historical perspective, you get a sense of a few things. One is that these moments are temporary, and the other is that they always lead to improvements that make everything better in the long run. Now, all of this might feel like cold comfort to somebody who has lost their job and may be facing eviction because of the shutdown, or to somebody who just lost a parent to COVID. Obviously, my heart goes out to anybody who's dealing with that kind of thing right now, and I know that's a lot of you. No amount of, hey, look on the bright side is going to make that better. But even if you haven't experienced the worst of what's going on right now, there's a general sense of heightened anxiety that takes its toll after a while. And I guess that's what this video is meant to address. You know, that when you look into history, you see that these things happen, they're temporary, but they do lead to improvements over time. So a good way to spend some of this anxious energy you might have going on right now is to work for those improvements. Try to shape this world that's going to come out of this crisis and look forward to better things. I don't know, I find that it helps to put things in historical perspective, and if you are the same way, I can highly recommend the series 1929 on Curiosity Stream. This two-part series looks at the Great Depression, starting with the conditions that set up the big crash in the 1920s, and then examining the experience of the people who lived through it over the next 10 years through archival footage and interviews with historians from all around the world, providing a global perspective. It really gives a good look at the ingenuity we have and the ability to tap into in times of crisis and what we learned from the Depression, as well as some of the things we didn't learn. This, of course, is just one of thousands of high-quality documentaries on Curiosity Stream on all kinds of subjects like science and popular culture, and if you want to stay up to date, they do have an ongoing series on the coronavirus and our efforts to combat it. There's also a new series on the history of homes starring Nick Offerman that I'm pretty excited about. Parks and Rec fan for life. Now, I love Curiosity Stream. It is seriously one of my favorite streaming services. It's what Discovery Channel was supposed to be. And when you sign up for Curiosity Stream, you get a free subscription to Nebula, the streaming service that I'm a part of, along with tons of other educational YouTubers, where you can watch our content ad-free in one place, plus get access to Nebula exclusives that you can't find anywhere else. And you can get both Curiosity Stream and Nebula for only $2.99 a month when you sign up at curiositystream.com/Joe Scott. It is easily the best bang for your buck in terms of streaming services that you can get out there. Anyway, I highly recommend it. If you haven't checked out Curiosity Stream, trust me, you're missing out. So curiositystream.com/Joe Scott, links down below. Big thanks to Curiosity Stream for supporting this video, and a huge shout out to the Answer Files on Patreon that are helping me to grow a team, forming an awesome community, and just being overall really cool people. There's some new people that have joined. Let me murder their names real quick. We've got Celia Gonzalez, Nicholas Briers, Etienne, Tom Sobieski, William Billy Robillard, John S. Sears, Margaret Grace, Luke Shackleton, Colin Williams, Michael John O'Neill, Stephen Rhodes, Vaska Choliowski, Chalkovsky, Vaska Chalkovsky, Kiana DeVries, James Lee, James Walters, Dr. Funkenstein, Juan Sepulveda, and John Williams. All right, thank you guys so much. If you'd like to join them and get early access to videos, as well as exclusive access to me, and just join an awesome community, you can go to patreon.com/AnswersWithJoe. Please do like and share this video if you liked it, and if this is your first time here, watch this video. Google wants you to watch it. It's up your alley. Or any of the others down here that have my face on it. And if you like them and you're not subscribed, I invite you to subscribe. I do come back with videos every Monday. All right, that's it for now. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening week, stay safe, and I'll see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care.